Hey everyone, I'm 64 here, and today we're here, and we are done with Balan Wonderworld on PC. So that's it. We've already finished the game. We've showed you guys at least all the costumes I haven't given too much of a spotlight to, and most especially, I really think that after reading the book, it does get a few more points out of me in terms of the reason you're doing everything you're doing in the game. So, to start with the story, I don't plan on reading the whole thing. At least not on this video here. Maybe someday on the stream whenever I get to like 1k subs or whatever, but right now I just have like a bit of a summary on like the first part of the game. The first part of the story. So, the thing is that with this, it kind of takes the place with Street B, Leo Craig, who makes his way into the Wonderworld. When he goes into the Wonderworld, the first person he's introduced to is not Emma, like he is in the game, but rather is introduced into Clockwork Kid, or rather Clock Tower Kid. My apologies. And yes, that is the actual name. And the Leo Craig's name at this moment is actually Street B. There's a reason for this, don't worry. So, when they both arrive in the Wonderworld, they're both greeted by Lance, as opposed to Balan. When they meet Lance, he kind of gives them like this whole little tour of all the stages you meet. You see characters like Scarecrow, Pensive Period, even Bugsy. Not to be confused with Bubsy. Oh, God, no. I really do think that having all this being incorporated in the way it is actually pretty nice, because it gives you details on what exactly you're looking to in the Wonderworld and what's in place. So the reason why they're there is actually because their hearts, or at least a piece of their hearts, are separated from themselves. Lance is trying to get them into the Wonderworld so they're in this happy area. They don't have to worry about these painful memories or whatever have you. And what comes from this is whenever there's like even a little shred of them remembering, even a little bit, Lance ends up yoinking any type of that shred, and it turns into this negative energy that keeps this world running. The fact that it's called negative, or negative, should give you an idea of what we're looking at here. So, once confronted about this whole thing about negative energy and memories, Lance kind of gave this immediate impression that no, this is how it's supposed to be. This is going to keep you from seeing all those gone awful memories that has hurt you in the real world. And instead, they try to keep you there. And even Clock Tower Kid, when Clock Tower Kid was talking, or rather when Street B was trying to talk to Clock Tower Kid, any instance he says the word cat, the Clock Tower Kid, immediately just clenches over herself, like puts her up in a little crouch state, and just freaks out about that memory. If you remember the game, remember this is the little girl who saw that cat who ended up, And at one point, she was so retracted from that memory, like she wanted to be as far away from it as possible, that once Lance gave her enough of this negative energy and retracted this, there was a little mark that ended up appearing on her as well as all the other inhabitants of the Wonderworld. With Leo, he also had this mark, but what separates him from Clock Tower Kid was that at one point the Clock Tower Kid actually transformed into a cat-like monster. And what's worse is that at this moment, throughout this whole time they're going through these tours, you see all these these little shadowy creatures, the negative, running amok. There was also the point where the other characters were starting to transform. Throughout this whole process, Street Beat finally met Fighter. No, the name is literally Fighter. Emma Cole's name is Fighter. And then you finally meet Balan. Once Street Beat and I'm sorry, but these names. Once Street Beat and Fighter meet Balan, they eventually, for these two, for some reason, have the ability to remember what their actual names are. And of course, the names are Leo Craig and Emma Cole. Emma Cole is the one who tries to bring Leo back to their memories. And throughout this whole thing, Balan is trying to put these two back into the Wonderworld to test them so that their pieces of the heart can be put back into them. To initiate this test and to pass it, they have to save all the other inhabitants of the Wonderworld from their memories and pieces of their hearts being separated from themselves. Which means effectively removing that mark that Lance was giving them. Of course, it wouldn't be that easy because Lance actually made it so he sets up the whole story where Balan and Emma are like the evil ones here, and those little Tim creatures, the fur little birds we've been playing around with throughout the whole playthrough of the game. Oh no, they're part of this whole gang where they're going to take the Wonderworld away from you, and all these beautiful, happy memories are going to be gone. Of course, that was a huge lie. It's just, it just wasn't. I don't know. It's like, I think the biggest thing about this is that this sets up the whole story of how the game begins, and virtually none of that is in the game itself. So what happens in the game instead is that you see that Street Beat is actually in the real world. He eventually stumbles into the Wonderworld through meeting Balan first, and technically Emma, they see a reflection of themselves through there, even though technically that's actually each other, Emma and Leo. They meet Balan, and what ends up happening is that they actually do explain the part where they go through this whole test of getting their own pieces of the heart put into themselves through this test of saving everyone else. It's just that little piece I mentioned, the whole thing about Lance telling everyone else that Balan's the evil one, you need to prevent him from taking away this Wonderworld stage that they each have, including the Clock Tower Kid. All this happening, none of this is ever in the game. None of it. None of that is in the game. However, once you do go into the Island of Tims, which isn't necessarily the Island of Tims, you just go straight into each of the stages, that's when it actually starts lining up, where you have, for example, Scarecrow. Scarecrow was a little bit upset with the fact that his plants kept getting destroyed by these forces that keeps messing up his overall crops and plantation. He gets so upset about the fact that he just kind of stops doing any type of farming whatsoever. That part of his memories is what separated that piece of his heart, and what gave Lance the power to give to the Scarecrow in order to power up and essentially transform. And this is where the game takes place. When you go into one stage, once you clear it, you get that one piece of the heart, and once you complete the other stage, not necessarily Act 1 and Act 2 respectively, but just either one of these two can do, once you complete both of these, then the heart pieces actually go back into each other, and that's when that shred of horror memories actually comes back, or in this case, using our same example, Scarecrow here. Because Scarecrow really does not want to remember that, Lance gives him the power to transform, and yes, that's why we have those boss battles when they show these transformations and all those admittedly pretty cool transitions into the boss battles. And that's also why whenever you beat the boss battles, the Lance mark disappears from them, and then at that point, it just turns into this whole fiasco of, alright, you saved him, his memories are back, he's somehow resolved his confrontation of the memory and how horrible he's felt it. Alright, next stage. That's how it's carried in the next game. Every time you beat a boss battle, it's kind of like they say, oh, he immediately came back to his senses, and he's immediately wanted to go back to planning again. Which is cool. I'm glad he's able to pick himself up after all that. So, with all this said about the Scarecrow example, this is something that applies to pretty much everyone. The Sentinel, the Lady of the Midnight Sun, Bugsy, even Clock Tower Kid, who already transformed at the time, everyone. Throughout the moments of you going through the stages, they actually go a little bit into more detail about how the memory transformed this person, both in a metaphorical and literal sense. The only difference is that in the story, it ends up happening throughout the entirety of the act, whereas the game, you only see that after you confront the boss. With all that being said, however, once you do get to Lance, he's already in this transformed state where all this negative energy he's gotten from all of the 12 inhabitants here effectively made him more powerful enough to take over the entirety of the Wonderworld. And this is where both Emma and Leo are meant to end up fighting with each other in order to stop Lance from advancing any further from taking over. I'm still curious about the whole thing about the bouts though, and I'm not talking about the bouts where Balan directly confronts Lance. I'm more so talking about the moments where he's just flying through it on his own. Like, or is that like saving the pieces of memory that's clouded? That's what I'm thinking it is during the whole bout procedure here, because it does show that every obstacle he breaks does have the same negative flow and aura like the other ones. But it's about the last one for me. Like the last one, he charges through a little bit of a particle energy. I tried reading through it and seeing if I can get any context on that, but I think that's just more of a game thing. And the story also doesn't mention anything about the Act 3, so I guess you could say it's pretty much just gaming content at that point. But once you do beat Lance, of course, we've seen his full form. We saw him Balan's full form. Everyone goes back to their stages and goes back to the real world, including Emma and Leo. Now, with all that being said about the story, I think now knowing this, the story actually makes a lot more sense with this. I wish I was able to read this while I was still playing the game instead of what I did. But keep in mind, again, this was a blind playthrough. I wasn't going to know this. However, even with the context, while I get the story and the context of everything that's happening with this, I can't say that it suddenly makes the game like super great or anything. It makes the characters stand out a lot more than I thought they would, instead of it just being like set pieces for what you have to do for the game. But it really just isn't enough on its own. Like the story can absolutely live on its own. The game, absolutely not. I think if you read the story first, you're pretty much going to get as much of the entertainment you're going to get from the game, outside of the fact that you actually get to control the costumes and everything. But that's also where the whole game design of everything being one button also negatively impacts the whole experience with the game. Because like, what you're essentially missing from the story versus the game is quite literally just one button and a control stick. Now, of course, a button and a control stick by itself doesn't necessarily mean bad. I mean, look at Atari. Atari's a legend for that kind of control scheme. It's just, at this point, you kind of wish there was a bit more with it. Especially since I've been playing through the game the way I have with this. But that's really about it. If they do end up making another game with this, first off, please keep the story and elements in the game. I can't necessarily say I'm a big fan of the fact that you have to spend $60 on the game. Like, you know, when it came out in 21. And then you had to get the book, which I don't know what the original price was. I only got it for like $10. You have to get that book just to get the full experience of the game. Because if you don't, that beginning section I explained to you, it's never explained in the game. You don't see it in the theater. It's just not there. With all that said, one thing in the theater that is there, and something that has not covered, is two things. One, Emma's version of the beginning and the ending. And second, what happens when you fully complete a chapter. And this does also extend to fully in the game. So, with all this being said, I do wish for this game's concepts, characters, and settings to be explored a bit more, maybe with a different, more polished game, but this one just simply wasn't it. This was not a good representation of what the book or the story has to offer. And if they do go with this, I want them to expand on what they can do with the costumes, the story, and everything, rather than make it a whole system of the Tims, the whole system of the costumes, and then that's it. So with that being said, I do believe at this point of the video they should start getting into the Emma Cole and the 100% cutscene, just to give you an example of what it actually does. And with that, I'll see you guys next time. As for the new playthrough, I'm not sure what it is yet. I'm going to be focusing on the Season 3 of Crash Team Rumble for the time being. I guess when the new year starts, we're going to hit up on a new playthrough, but right now, I'm just going to be enjoying myself for the rest of the holidays. And I hope you guys do the same as well. Take care.
Sometimes we cry, we wait. Sometimes we can't see anything, but don't give up. You